more than it has to.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Max. It's going to be a short talk about a tool that we're a work in progress little tool that we want to use in education of parallel functional programming. So, what's this Power Monad thing anyway? Power Monad is an interface in Haskell for writing task parallel code. So here is how you write the slow parallel fib function in the Power Monad. You would take the n, you spawn two parallel computations which compute your fib of n minus 1 and fib of n minus 2. You bind to these things which you can later use to obtain the result of the computation, the two recursive computations that we have, and then we can return the sum of the two results. And it might not look like it, but this is computing a dataflow graph. And as Simon Marlowe, who originally authored the Power Monad, pointed out in his book, there's no way to visualize these graphs. And in education, this is a really important thing, being able to visualize what you're doing. So, yeah, now we can visualize these graphs. That's what we've been doing. And how do our visualizations work? Well, every node here represents a thread in the parallel computation, something which has been created by spawn, or created by calling the original function. The edges, we see these two types of edges, F and G, denote relationships between threads. So, for instance, fib5 will fork, that's the F edge, fib4, and it will fork fib3. It will then get, that's the G edge, the result from fib4, and it will get the result from fib3. And so on recursively down the tree. Right. So let's have a sort of more in-depth look at the Power Monad interface. The original interface consists of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 functions here. Fork, which takes a Power Monad computation, sets it off to run in parallel. But note the unit return type. We have no way of obtaining the result from the thing we forked, other than by some form of side effect. So how do we do that? Well, we create these things called IVARs. IVARs are a parallel data structure. They can be put into once, and data can be put into the once and obtained from them multiple times. So we have put, which takes an IVAR, an A, and puts the result into the IVAR. We have get, which you can use to get the result from the IVAR. And yeah, then we have run part, which is the original scheduler, which is implemented as a work stealing scheduler, which will send off your parallel threads in parallel on the number of cores that you have chosen. Right. So we can see that using this interface, we can derive the spawn operation we saw earlier. We just create a new IVAR, which is going to be used to communicate the result. We set the computation which computes the value of in parallel, which is then going to put this result into the IVAR, and then we return the IVAR, which we can later use to get the result. And to this interface, we only add really two key functions. One is fork name, which lets us, instead of just forking a thread, any thread, right? We can give it an identifier, and this is how we produce the fib5, fib4, fib3, and so on. Names in the previous picture. And similarly, we have VisPar, which, given some options and some stuff, will produce a nice PDF file, which the students can use to understand the parallel code. Right. So here's a tiny example of what you get. So first, we have a very small Power Monad computation. We'll just create a new IVAR. We'll compute the meaning of life and put the value into the IVAR, and then we'll obtain, in a separate thread, in parallel, and we'll obtain the results from the IVAR. In the style of graph that we saw earlier, and here I've omitted using fork name, so you'll see that we default to just having threads which are named 0, 1, 2, the consecutive order in which they're spawned, or forked, sorry. And yeah, so here we just see the simple relationship, 0 forks 1, and 0 gets from an I-bar which is put into by 1. And we also have more interesting graphs which show a more detailed execution trace. So here, instead of denoting individual threads, each node represents an API call in the power manner. So we have 0 creating a new I-bar, that line. It's forking, that's the next call. 1 is then doing a put, 0 is doing a get, and then we're done. And note that we've introduced another type of edge here. We've been looking at the F and G edges previously. We also have the C edges now, which denote a continuation. That's the C edges you can think of as implicitly introduced by the monadic bind in the power manner. So they're just a direct relationship within one. And that helps us just keep track and see what's there. Right. So before I go on to how we use this in teaching, my supervisor, Mary Sheeran, she has a bit of a thing for parallel prefix networks. And if you were here for Connor's talk, you were also seeing him, was it Connor? No, it was Colonel. Getting mixed up. Colonel's talk, he talked about these Skalansky parallel prefix networks. This is what the graphs look like. You can see they get pretty big pretty quickly, so they're not great for putting on slides perhaps, but we can see that there's some structure right in the way parallel prefix works, and we divide the problem and then we merge them. Right. I'll let you look at that while I think. And we can see that there is some opportunity for parallelism just by looking at this. But now we'll look at, very briefly, how we tackle an exam question from Mary's parallel functional programming course. So in the exam question, the students are provided with a body version of the reduce function which runs slowly. And why does it run slowly? Well, the task of the students is to fix the implementation by introducing a small change. It's slow because it's accidentally sequential. We get a list, which we're going to compute the reduction of an associative binary operator on. We split the list in 2 halves, and then we spawn a parallel computation to reduce one of the halves. We then do a get on the I-bar that we got from the spawn, which means that before we do any actual work, I've set something off to run in parallel, and now I'm waiting for the result before anything happens. And then I go and do some work, and then I return the result. And you can see that, and this is the sort of thing we'd like our students to look at, you can see that the graph that we get out from running this execution is completely sequential. And it's kind of a sort of, well, it's a nice graph, I like it. Because it captures the behavior of this function. So the fix for this, you've probably already guessed, is to switch the lines that does the recursive reduce and the get call. And then we see that our graph now looks like there's some parallelism going on there. So just comparing the 2 graphs, completely sequential, somewhat parallel looking. That's not very precise, that notion. So we can turn to more precise reasoning about parallelism and available speedup on multicores by looking at Blelocks and others' work on work in depth and how that relates to running time. So work, sort of total number of operations, is approximated in our graph by the total number of nodes in the graph. Depth, the length of the longest chain of dependencies, where we can compute roughly what the longest chain of dependencies should be. Approximations thereof, of course, operations in the power manner interface do not correspond necessarily to computations all the computations that you're doing. But yeah, here we can relate running time, and we can see that we can get lower bounds for running time. And similarly, we can compute available speedup by just dividing the total number of work, or the total number of nodes that's in the work, by the longest chain of dependencies. And you will not get more speed, larger factor speedup than S, even if you threw an infinite number of cores. And then we can now make our notion of this thing looks more sequential than that thing. It's slightly more precise by saying, actually, if we compute the total amount of speed up here, we see that there is no speed up. Right? We can only get the factor 1 faster by throwing an infinite number of course at the problem. It's not very good. Here perhaps we could see a factor 1.75 speed up. Of course, it's an approximation, but in this case it turns out to be a rather good approximation. And these graphs will of course look different depending on the input that you give, and this is not a sort of general, the input you give to the reduce function, that is. And it's not a general speed up figure, it will be more if you give it a longer list. Right. Oh yeah, so a very brief word about how we implement this, because it's not the primary focus. It's not very difficult. The power monad is implemented in a sort of CPS style with this trace data type which tracks what you actually want to be doing. These I-bars are implemented with nasty IO functions that we're not going to think about. And we just add one primitive which sets the name of a trace locally. And with this we can actually derive more interesting operations than just the thing that sets a thread off to with a separate name. We can change the name of the local thread and so on and so forth. Read the paper, details. But yeah, we then add our own scheduler, the VisPar function I showed you in the beginning, which will run the power monad computation. We can't get away from having to run it, of course, because we're in a monad. The shape of the execution will depend on the water I'm drinking. It will depend on the intermediate values. Right. So yeah, just to sum up, make your code make pretty pictures. That's the most important thing in code, I think. Make it make pretty pictures. But seriously, pictures are a useful tool for understanding facets of parallel programs, and we hope to see that it will be useful in education. Spoke to Marcus earlier, who's a teaching assistant in the course that we're targeting, and let's see what we can do. And I'll come back to you once I know more about how our students react to this. So yeah, questions?
So I have a question. It was quite obvious from the graphs that you generated that you weren't actually making it parallel. It was still sequential. Could you use this information to add a warning in the compiler? Hey, I see you tried to make something parallel, but it's still sequential.
You could do something like that, but not in the compiler, because it would require actually running the code to figure this out. Right, so it is dynamic. So what you could do is provide the students with a tool where the tool will actually say, look, this is looking really sequential. Perhaps it's something that we could use for automated grading or something like that to provide feedback and say, look, this part of the code isn't looking so apparent. So I think you had a question?
Yes. Could you do a par applicative so that you could generate these graphs without running the full program?
That's possible, yeah. It might. So a par applicative could do it, maybe a par arrow could do it too. I haven't actually thought about that. That's an interesting idea. I should look at that.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about the same thing you asked. Do you think it's possible to use something like index monads to keep track of how many things are currently in parallel and use that in a way so there's lines which basically in the do block that could maybe be signaled in some way by the compiler in that sense.
Right, so you mean keeping track of how parallel you are in time?
Yeah, I think so.
Using index monads.
Yeah, spawning would increment that.
Right, so then you would specify that your computation, I would like this to be at least a 2 fan-out computation, say, and then if it's not, then yeah, potentially, I don't know how you would implement that, because you would have to keep track of if the previous thing was a fork and are now on a get, then So I'm not entirely sure. I would have to experiment with it or something else.
Okay, so while you can't generate graphs for non-terminating or deadlocking computations, this notion of a trace you have, couldn't that be used to explain why it's deadlocking? Saying this task with this name wants to read from this IVAR that was created by this other task with this name, but there's nothing is ever really writing to it.
I'm not sure, because you would have to keep track of what things have a reference to the IVAR.
Yeah, if you want to do a really good job, then you could just say this task created this IVAR, so you have that information in your graphs. So it will at least tell you which task is deadlocking, but just trying to read from an IVAR that has never been written to.
Right, but because you have sharing of the IVARs,
Yes.
so communication of an IVAR from one thread to another isn't explicit.
Well, the read is explicit, right? So
The read is explicit, but yeah, I should have
the only place for
explained
deadlock.
that the gets are blocking until something
Right,
is put
so
into.
the only way we can deadlock is by reading from an IVAR that no one is ever writing to, right?
Yes, so then you would have to know that no one else has a reference to that.
Well, then you use timeout. If the user can see that if the program is hanging, he can say, okay, tell me which task is currently
All right,
firing.
where am I? Sure.
It will be a heuristic because,
You
multi-problem and all that.
could do something like you build an interactive debugger that will give you the partial graph.
But you almost have enough information in your trace to do that, don't you?
Yes, but you would want to build some form of interface around that anyway.
I have a final question. For big computations, let's say you have a recurrence in which you are spawning threads and so on, so that will produce a huge graph.
Yeah.
Are there any future work that, targeting, reducing the essence?
Right. So there are a few things that we've thought about with reducing the size of graphs. One thing is to do some form of subgraph isomorphism and get rid of, say that, okay, I have 5 blocks and they all look essentially the same. And then shrink them, and then you would have to do solve some subgraph isomorphism. Another thing you could potentially do is to add notions of, okay, you can do a put with an approximated amount of work. So the puts are the things where the actual computation is happening. So you could say that, okay, you get to the amount of work that would be involved in computing this result, approximate, and then you can use that to make some notes in the graph bigger, or say reduce relevant parts of the graph and maybe not show them at all. So there's lots of exciting work done by other people on visualization for education, and this is sort of work in progress, and we're looking at doing a lot of it.
Thank you. Let's thank again.